They took all her clothes and left her for dead. "I'll take you home," said the mountain man. "Leave her," snarled Eli Turner, his voice sharp as the wind that whipped across the Kansas plains. "She's worth nothing now. Let the snow bury her." The blizzard howled, tearing at Ruthie Mae Carter's bare skin. She stumbled in the drifts, her body trembling, lips blue with cold. Her cousins had stripped her of everything, her coat, her boots, even the deed to the land her father left behind. Betrayal stung deeper than the frost. Family, bound by blood, had chosen greed over love, leaving her to freeze in the white silence of the prairie. She tried to call out, but her voice was no more than a broken whisper lost to the storm. Her knees buckled, and she sank into the snow, certain this would be her grave. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow moved against the storm. A man, tall as a pine and broad as the mountain ridges that loomed on the horizon. His beard was thick with frost, his shoulders wrapped in a wolfskin cloak. He moved with the certainty of someone who belonged to the wilderness. When he reached her, Ruthie felt rough, calloused hands lifting her as though she weighed nothing. His eyes, pale as the winter sky, studied her face. "You'll not die here," he said in a voice deep as thunder. "Not while I breathe." Her lips trembled, trying to form words. Why help me?" The stranger shifted her against his chest, his warmth wrapping around her like the only shelter in the world. "Because no one deserves to be left for dead," he answered. "I'll take you home." And with that vow, Ezekiel Boone, the mountain man of Fire Ridge, carried Ruthie out of the storm, toward a fate neither of them could yet imagine. The cabin's fire crackled low, throwing shadows against the rough-hewn logs. Ruthie lay swaddled in blankets so thick they nearly swallowed her whole. Yet still, she shivered. Her skin burned from frostbite, her cheeks blotched red where the storm had whipped her raw. Every breath rattled like glass in her lungs. Ezekiel Boone knelt beside the bed he had built with his own hands years ago. He was a man of silence, but not of cruelty. His large hands, scarred from axes and war, moved with surprising care as he laid a cloth dampened with warm water across her forehead. "You'll mend," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Her eyes fluttered open. The firelight glowed against her round face, still youthful, but worn from hardship. She looked at him with confusion first, then fear. "Don't be frightened," he said, voice rough from disuse. "You're safe." Tears welled, spilling down her temples. "Safe," she repeated, as if tasting a word she had never known. In halting fragments, the truth spilled from her lips. Her cousins, the Turners, had cornered her the night before, demanding she surrender the deed her father left in her keeping. When she refused, they dragged her out into the storm, stripping her of clothing and dignity alike. They left her with nothing but the white silence, expecting the snow to claim her. Ezekiel listened, jaw clenched, eyes burning like embers. He had heard of the Turners, men who swaggered through ironwood, living off greed and fear, but to betray blood like that, to leave a woman to die in the snow, even for them it was monstrous. "You'll not return to them," he said flatly. Ruthie's voice cracked. "But the land, it was my father's. Without it, I have nothing." "You have breath in your body," Ezekiel replied. "That is something, and you have me, for as long as you need." The word startled her. He was a stranger, a man whispered about in town as half wild, dangerous, more beast than man. Yet here he was, tending her wounds, feeding her broth spoon by spoon. There was no cruelty in his eyes, only a hardness forged by loss. As the days passed, Ruthie grew stronger. Ezekiel gave her space when she needed it, but he was always near, splitting wood, stirring stew, mending a trap. The silence between them was never heavy. It was steady, like the mountain itself. One morning, when she was strong enough to stand, he led her outside. Snow still blanketed the earth, but the sky was clear, washed in pale gold. She stood unsteadily, clutching a shawl he draped across her shoulders. "This is your land now," Ezekiel said, nodding toward the valley that stretched beyond the ridge. "Not theirs. You'll take it back." Her chest tightened. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," he answered simply. "They thought the snow would kill you, but you're here. That makes you stronger than them already." For the first time, Ruthie looked not at her body, soft, heavy, mocked since childhood, but at her breath steaming against the sky, proof that she had survived what was meant to destroy her. And standing beside this man of the mountain, she felt a seed of something she hadn't known in a long time. Hope. The road into Ironwood was nothing more than a frozen track, carved between fields of snow and skeletal trees. Ruthie wrapped herself tighter in the heavy cloak Ezekiel had given her, its wolfskin collar brushing her chin. Each breath stung in her lungs, but compared to the storm that nearly ended her life, the cold felt almost merciful. Ezekiel walked a half step ahead, his stride sure and steady, carrying the weight of both axe and rifle across his back. Though he spoke little, his presence gave her courage. She knew if the Turners or anyone else tried to lay a hand on her again, this man would not allow it. "Why are you taking me to town?" Ruthie asked at last, her voice muffled beneath the scarf. "You need clothes," he replied simply. "Food, too, things I can't give you in the cabin." She hesitated. "And if they see me? The Turners?" His head turned slightly, pale eyes scanning hers. "Then they'll learn quickly you're not alone anymore." The words struck deeper than she expected. Not alone. She had carried loneliness like a cloak since the day her father died, and hearing them aloud made her chest ache with something close to relief. By midday, they reached Ironwood. The town bustled despite the cold, horses stamping frost from their hooves, wagons rattling over frozen ruts, women in shawls hurrying between mercantile and bakery. Yet, as Ruthie stepped onto Main Street, she felt eyes turn her way. Whispers trailed in her wake. "That's Carter's girl. Thought she was gone. Look how fat she's gotten. Surprised she survived the storm at all. She's with him? God help her." Ruthie's cheeks burned, shame rising hot. She tugged the cloak tighter, wishing she could disappear. But Ezekiel's voice cut through the murmurs. "Hold your head high," he said, not unkindly. "They don't know the storm you've walked through." Inside the mercantile she picked out a plain calico dress, thick stockings and boots that actually fit. Ezekiel laid coin on the counter without a blink, though she protested. "I'll pay you back," she whispered. He shook his head. "Keep your coin. You'll need it for harder days." As they left, they crossed paths with Reverend Samuel Cole and his wife Anna. The Reverend, a tall, kind-eyed man, paused. "Ruthie Carter? Child, we heard you'd perished in the snow." His voice softened. "Praise God you're alive." Ruthie's throat closed with emotion. Anna took her hands gently. "You'll come to the parsonage for supper tonight. You look starved, and no girl should walk through this trial alone." Ezekiel's jaw tightened, but Ruthie nodded gratefully. "Thank you." truly. That evening, in the warmth of the parsonage, Ruthie shared the truth of what had happened. The betrayal, the deed stolen, the cold bite of the storm. The Reverend listened with grave attention, while Anna dabbed tears from her eyes. "They meant to kill you," Reverend Cole said firmly. "This cannot be hidden. The town must know." But before Ruthie could reply, a knock rattled the door, heavy, demanding. When Anna opened it, the Turners stood there, flanked by Deputy Pike. "There she is," Eli Turner sneered. "Ruthie, you've caused enough trouble. Come home now." Ruthie's heart lurched, fear rising, but Ezekiel stepped between her and the doorway, his height blocking the men from view. "She's not going anywhere," he growled. Deputy Pike scowled. "Law says she's their kin. They've a right to her care." Reverend Cole's voice rang sharp. "Law does not grant the right to murder, Deputy. She stays here tonight. Under my roof, she is under God's protection." The Turners muttered, eyes narrowed, but Ezekiel did not budge. He stood like a mountain, rooted in place, and at last, with a threat hissed under their breath, they left. When the door shut, Ruthie trembled, but for the first time she didn't crumble. She had not stood alone, and as Ezekiel's hand brushed her shoulder steadying her, she felt a spark kindle in her chest, a spark that whispered, "Maybe I can fight back." The mountain cabin welcomed them back with the smell of smoke and pine resin, a shelter against the cutting wind that swept the Kansas plains. For Ruthie, who had spent her first days there shivering and near death, the place now carried a different weight. It was not merely survival, it was the beginning of something resembling life. Ezekiel moved about the space with practiced ease. He stoked the fire until it roared, then set a pot over the flames. The scent of venison stew soon filled the air, rich and hearty. Ruthie, still adjusting to the plain dress Anna Cole had mended for her, folded quilts at the foot of the bed. "You don't need to fuss," Ezekiel said, glancing over. "I want to," she answered. "It feels good to be useful." His gaze softened for just a moment before returning to the stew. "Then this is your home as much as mine. Do as you please." The words caught her off guard. Home. She had not thought of any place that way since her father's death. Her cousins had stolen the farmstead, the land, even her dignity. But here, in this rough cabin of logs and stone, she felt the fragile stirrings of belonging. The days that followed were filled with simple work. She swept the floor, scrubbed the table, and sewed a patch onto Ezekiel's worn coat. He, in turn, chopped wood, mended fences, and set traps in the forest. Though they moved in silence often, it was never the cruel silence of neglect. Rather, it was the kind that spoke of comfort, of two souls learning to breathe in rhythm. One morning, as she watched him split a log with one clean swing, she asked, "Will you teach me?" He paused, surprised. "You want to learn to chop wood?" "I don't want to be helpless any more," she admitted. "Not after what they did." Without a word, he placed the axe in her hands. The weight startled her, but he stepped behind, guiding her stance, his large hands steadying her wrists. "Plant your feet, swing from the shoulders, not the arms." Her first strike glanced off the log. She flushed, muttering, "I'll never manage." But his voice was steady. Again. She tried again and again until finally the wood split with a sharp crack. A laugh burst from her lips, unpolished, unexpected, alive. Ezekiel's mouth twitched into what might have been the ghost of a smile. That evening, she insisted on cooking. It was a simple meal: beans with onions and a bit of bread. But when he took the first bite, he said, "Better than I could do." She blushed, looking down at her hands. No one had ever spoken praise over her cooking before. No one had ever praised her for anything. As the weeks passed, her confidence grew. She began to walk the ridge trails, gathering kindling, her breath white against the cold air. She hummed softly as she mended clothing, melodies her father once whistled on long summer days. Slowly, the weight of humiliation and betrayal began to lift, yet nights were hardest. Sometimes she woke from dreams of snow and laughter, her cousins' cruel voices echoing, the icy claws of death dragging her down. On those nights, she would sit by the fire until dawn. Ezekiel, wordless, would join her, setting another log on the flames. He never asked, never pressed, but his presence was enough to keep the darkness at bay. One evening, as the wind howled outside, she whispered, "Do you think I can ever be whole again?" Ezekiel's eyes caught the firelight, fierce and gentle all at once. "You are whole already? They tried to break you, but you lived. That strength most will never know." Her eyes filled, but the tears that spilled were not of shame. They were of being seen, truly seen, for the first time. Spring began to creep over the land, melting snow from the ridges. With it came laughter, tentative at first, then brighter, as Ruthie found her voice again. And through it all, Ezekiel was there, steady, silent, the mountain man who had promised her safety and, without words, had begun to teach her the meaning of love. Peace on the mountain could not last forever. Ruthie felt it first in the way Ezekiel grew restless, staring too long into the fire at night, his jaw clenched as though wrestling with ghosts. She had begun to laugh again, to smile in the mornings as she swept the cabin, but she sensed the weight he carried. One evening, when the stew simmered and shadows stretched across the floor, she found the courage to ask, "Ezekiel, what keeps you awake?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he spoke. "I was a husband once, a father too." His voice was gravel, every word dragged from stone. "Years ago, raiders came through Ironwood's outskirts. I fought, but I was too far away. By the time I returned, the cabin was ash. My wife, my little girl, gone." Her heart clenched. She had suspected loss in him, but not like this. "I built these walls after," he continued, gesturing around them, "not for living, only for surviving. I thought if I kept myself, no one could be taken from me again." His eyes met hers, burning. "Then I found you in the snow." Ruthie reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched his. "You didn't fail them. You gave me life when I had none left. That matters." Before more could be said, a sound split the night. The distant bark of voices. She froze. Ezekiel rose instantly, pulling his rifle from the wall. Through the cabin's narrow window, lanterns flickered down the ridge. The Turners. By morning, the whole town knew Ruthie had survived, and the cousins wanted what they had nearly killed her for: land, inheritance, and silence. At their side stood Deputy Pike, his badge gleaming with borrowed power. When Ezekiel and Ruthie ventured into Ironwood days later for supplies, whispers rippled through the street. Some pitied her, some sneered. "She's making up stories," one man muttered. "Probably ran off and now wants attention." Others eyed Ezekiel with suspicion, calling him her giant, in tones half fearful, half mocking. At the mercantile, the Turners arrived, smug and bold. Eli Turner slammed a folded paper onto the counter. "The deed's in our name now. Father Carter meant it for us. She's lying through her teeth." Ruthie's blood ran cold, but she remembered something her father once said. "The truth, if guarded well, will always stand." Hand shaking, she reached beneath her calico dress into the lining Anna Cole had helped her mend. From the hidden seam she pulled the real deed, her father's will, signed and sealed. Gasps swept the room. "You stole this from me," she said, her voice breaking but loud enough for all to hear. "You left me to die in the storm, but my father's land is mine, not yours." The Turners blanched, then sneered, spitting insults. Deputy Pike barked that the matter wasn't settled, threatening to drag Ruthie before a judge who owed him favors. But Reverend Cole, stepping forward, raised his voice. "We've heard enough. The girl speaks truth, and if the law has eyes, it cannot ignore this." Ezekiel's massive hand rested on Ruthie's shoulder, steady as bedrock. "You'll not take her," he growled, "not while I draw breath." That night, back in the cabin, Ruthie sat trembling by the fire. For the first time she had spoken against her tormentors, but fear still lingered. "They'll come again," she whispered. "Yes," Ezekiel said simply, "and if they take me, they won't." His gaze held hers, fierce and unwavering. "Not while I live." Ruthie swallowed hard. "Then I'll stand with you. I won't be their victim again." The fire crackled, casting light across her determined face. She was no longer only the girl left naked in the snow. She was something stronger, something even her cousins could not silence, and Ezekiel knew, with a certainty that burned in his bones, that the coming storm would demand everything from them both. The storm broke not with snow this time, but with fire and gunpowder. Lanterns flickered in the trees as the Turners and Deputy Pike climbed the ridge, their boots crunching against frozen earth. From the cabin window, Ruthie saw the glow and felt her heart seize. "They've come," she whispered. Ezekiel rose from his chair, towering steady, his rifle already in hand. "Stay close to the hearth," he said. But when he looked into her eyes, he added, "If they mean to take you, you stand with me. Do not cower." Her hands trembled, but she nodded. "I won't." The door shuddered under a heavy kick, then burst open. Eli Turner stormed in, pistol drawn, Pike at his side. Behind them crowded two more cousins, faces twisted with malice. "This ends tonight," Pike barked. "The girl comes with us. You've no right to keep her here." Ezekiel stepped forward, his bulk filling the room, his axe gleaming in the firelight. "She's no one's prisoner," he said, his voice a low growl. "And you'll not take her." Eli sneered. "You think you can fight the law?" "The law?" Ruthie's voice rang out before fear could choke it down. She rose from beside the fire, shoulders squared, eyes burning. "What law strips a woman of her inheritance? What law leaves her naked in the snow? You're no lawmen. You're thieves." For a moment, silence gripped the room. Even Pike's bluster faltered beneath her defiance. Ezekiel's voice thundered, "You heard her. Leave before this mountain keeps your bones." The cousins lunged, weapons raised. The cabin erupted in chaos. A shot cracked, splintering wood. Ezekiel swung his axe, knocking Eli's pistol to the ground. Ruthie grabbed the iron poker from the fire and struck one cousin across the arm, sending him stumbling back with a howl. Pike aimed his revolver, but Ruthie's voice cut through the din. "If you kill us, the town will know the truth." Her words carried not fear, but conviction. It was enough. The hesitation broke Pike's nerve. The Turners, bloodied and defeated, dragged him back into the storm. Their threats echoed down the ridge, but the cabin still stood, and within it, so did Ruthie and Ezekiel. Breathless, Ruthie dropped the poker, her hands shaking. Ezekiel turned to her, chest heaving, eyes blazing with something fiercer than rage. Pride. "You stood," he said quietly. She swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "I had to. For Father. For me." He set down his axe and reached for her hand, rough palm engulfing hers. "You were braver than I've ever seen. You've already won." Outside, the night swallowed their enemies. Inside, firelight warmed two souls who had faced the storm together and refused to yield. The cabin was quiet again. Only the crackle of the fire and the low moan of the wind through the pines reminded Ruthie of the world beyond these walls. She sat at the table, cheeks still flushed from the fight, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the rush of standing her ground at last. Ezekiel poured water into a tin cup and set it before her. "Drink," he said softly. His voice carried none of the thunder it had when he faced her cousins, only a quiet steadiness that wrapped around her like another blanket. She lifted her eyes to his. "They'll come again, won't they?" "Perhaps," he admitted. "Greed is stubborn, but so is truth." He leaned closer, his scarred hand covering hers. "You're safe here, for as long as you'll stay." Her throat tightened. The words should have frightened her. They tethered her fate to his, but instead they filled her with warmth. Home had been stolen from her once. Now it was offered back, not in walls or land, but in the promise of belonging. Tears blurred her vision. "Then this is home." Ezekiel's eyes softened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something unspoken there. Hope, and perhaps love. The fire popped, throwing sparks upward, as if sealing the vow between them, and though danger still prowled the edges of their world, Ruthie knew one truth above all others. She was no longer alone. Every time I share a story like Ruthie's, I'm reminded how deeply we all long for love, dignity, and a place to belong. Her journey isn't just fiction. It speaks to anyone who has ever been cast aside, yet found strength to rise again. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Share it in the comments. I'd love to know. And if you still believe in love that conquers storms and silence alike, don't go anywhere. The next story is waiting for you.